I'd like to start, Andrew, by thanking you for taking the time to have the conversation today. Um, and before we get into the subject of writing, I am absolutely intrigued uh, by a guy who spends a lot of his time in the wilds of Wyoming and in London. So, how did that get started?
That is a great question, Roger. And first of all, thank you very much for having me as a guest on the show. It's an absolute pleasure. I'm delighted to be here. Right now, I'm in London. But yeah, you're right. I spend a great deal of time in Wyoming, and I absolutely love it there. It's a sort of place where people say to me, I was born in Birmingham, England, and they say, could you ever imagine living in a place like Wyoming? And my honest answer has to be, well, no, because I could never imagine there being a place like Wyoming. It is so different to anything I had ever experienced, In terms of scale, Wyoming is larger than the entire United Kingdom, but it has the population of 500,000 people. So it is so empty and so remote. We always joke and say, if we want to see a moose, we look out of our window. And if we want to see people, we have to get in the car and drive for half an hour. It is just such an amazing place. And we visited the first time back in 2016. My wife has moved around the United States an awful lot over the years. And she wanted to do a road trip where we saw some amazing places, and she showed me some of the places she'd lived. So we wound up in Wyoming, and I'd been there about 5 minutes when I turned to her and said, we were in the process of trying to move house. We were living in Chicago in a small apartment in the center of the city, and we didn't have enough room. We needed more space because we both work from home, both novelists. And so we tried to find somewhere in the city, but it was impossible, Nowhere could we find something that was suitable or affordable or that we liked. And so Wyoming, just so empty, this expanse of empty blue sky, the incredible landscapes with the mountains and the plains. I just said to her, well, look, we need to move anyway. Why don't we move here? And it was one of those things that just fell into place, boom, boom, boom. We found a house, we got agreed a price, got it all done in hardly any time at all. It was like magic. But I guess in a way, it must be you're up in Alaska, I believe, Roger. So is it a similar thing for you with that kind of wilderness?
Um, yeah, I guess that's probably why I asked the question. I had a somewhat similar experience. I came out of the Navy and tried desperately to go to law school at Columbia in New York.
Hmm.
And having just spent, months and months and months learning to fly jets, um, I really had trouble adjusting to law school, and
I
I
can
had a
imagine.
and I had a terrible time adjusting to New York. And figured well, I just need to clean my head out. And I had an opportunity to come up to Alaska just for 4 months working for an old friend who had asked just for a little help. Um, and took a leave of absence from law school and came up, fell in love with the place, never went back.
Mhm.
Um, and interesting, over the years, I built a number of companies, and I've had offices back in New York, and I've had offices in New York, in Los Angeles, and San Francisco, and uh, offices across Europe in building companies. Um, but this is home now, and part of it is what you just described. I can sit on my yard and watch the moose work back and forth through the yard. And I live in an urban environment. I'm about 10 miles out of Anchorage up in the mountains. But, every year we have brown bears and black bears and moose and fox and lynx. And every time that one of those things happens, my writing stops until they leave.
Mhm.
Because it just gives me a real sense of this is what life is really all about, and this is what the world is really all about.
Yeah, it really gives you some perspective, doesn't it? I mean, I remember once shortly after we moved, we were driving somewhere and we just pulled the car over, got out, switched off the engine. And unless you look back at the car, if you just looked in the other direction, 180 degrees, you couldn't see a single man-made structure as far as you looked. Everything was entirely natural. And everything was enormous, and you're tiny. And it just really does give you that sense of, whatever you're worried about that day, whatever your big problem is, you go out into nature like that and you realize, your problem's not that big because you're not either. You're not important. It's what's out there that's important.
Absolutely. And talking about big, you talk about how large Wyoming is. Alaska is 2.5 times the size of Texas. So people have no grasp of how vast this place is. I fly. I'm a pilot. I fly a Cessna, and we have a cabin on a river in Lake Iliamna. Now, it's about 2 hours by air from Anchorage in a light plane. You land on a gravel strip, and then you get to this little log cabin that we built 50 years ago. And there's very little there. But eagles roost literally in the trees right around the cabin, and I can sit on the screen porch and write. I don't tell very many people this, but thank you to Starlink, I can do research from the cabin now. And how many people can sit and write a thriller based in Mexico, watching bears feed in the river right below them? And this river flows into a lake that's just slightly larger than the state of Rhode Island.
Wow, that's insane.
So if and when the time comes and you really want to see some wilderness, we'll get you up here, put you in the airplane, and take you out and show you miles and miles of miles and miles. An old line stolen from an old Alaska writer, Sidney Lawrence.
Oh, I would absolutely love to do it. Thank you so much. Yeah. I mean, the remoter and wilder the better, as far as I'm concerned.